Hey everybody, I'm coming from you inside of my wife's M3, which has a roll bar that I fabricated for her about a year ago. Now, since that happened, I've done a number of roll bars for other people, and on the last one, I decided to film a whole bunch of little segments of the install. Kind of as a DIY, but not really. It was just kind of show tips and tricks and things like that that I do to install these. So what you're about to see was never meant for YouTube. It's not really well edited. It's, again, just all my cell phone videos glued together with a little bit of text, right? So nothing fancy. But hopefully, if anybody is looking to install a roll bar or build their own roll bar, these steps will help you. I didn't want the content to go to waste, so hey, enjoy it. Take it for what it is. And if you have any questions, feel free to post below, and I'll try to pay attention and just, again, answer the best I can to give you guys a hand. So anyway, enjoy. So we're inside of an S13, and I thought I'd make a quick how-to on roll bars. So this is going to have a weld-in 1 3/4 095 wall roll bar for a grip car. Obviously nothing's been started right now. So step 1, find out where you want to place your roll bar. We're going to place this hoop, the main hoop, right here where these two flanges meet, where the floor meets this upright. And if you notice, there's a bunch of spot welds, which is where there's some pseudo frame rail that's behind this. Obviously, this is the rocker, so this is a very, very strong part of the car. The rear, I'm going to do on top of the wheel well, but I'm going to tie it into the rear panel. So I'm going to use this flange and ride up on that a little bit. I'll plate that, and that's just going to go straight up behind me on where the roll bar connects to the main hoop. So step 1 is the boring stuff, which I've already done. Scrape away all the seam sealer. And then you can see right there, I've marked out what I need to grind on to get the paint prepped. Okay, step 2 is to start with some cardstock and trace out or sort of develop what you want as far as your boxes. Like I said before, I'm going to land it on top of the rocker panel, on top of this riser where the rear seat goes, and tie it into the 2 different sheet steels down here on the floor pan. So then you just make something that makes sense. I'm going to just loosely trace this out. And this is just going to give me all the different areas that I need to grind on, because I got to get it really, really, really clean, or it's not going to weld very well. So just rough it out. I use cardstock from Walmart, poster board from Walmart. It's like 13 cents a sheet, and it'll last a couple cages because you're only using a couple inches at a time. So anyway, okay, all clean. Don't skip on this step. Clean, clean, clean. It's only going to make your job easier later. Also, take a look at your rule book if you're building a cage to a certain spec, because sometimes they have minimum square inches. But quick tip, things that I use to get in there. All right, so I do the bulk of the paint removal and things with just a flapper wheel on a 4.5 inch angle sander. Typical whiz wheel stuff. And then the only thing that's a little bit unique that I have that's not maybe your average guy is this is a 5/8 wide air belt sander. They're pretty cheap to get. I think this one came from Amazon, but this really helps to get into really, really tight locations and things, just to peel out that last little bit of seam sealer. So not really focusing well, but anyway. So the major bits are all done. Now it's time to start cutting the boxes. Okay, so I ran out of plate for the boxes to finish those, so I'm going to move over to the main hoop. This right here is just a quick image of what the main hoop is obviously going to be, so it's just 4 bends, super simple. I've gone ahead and measured the inside of the car on the outermost dimensions, and I usually, just one tip, I use this B-pillar total length. Keep it a little bit long, it's about a 1/2 inch too long. It needs to be around 38 inches. So then I move over to BENDTECH Pro. I like BENDTECH. I probably saved, just in the first cage that I did, I paid for probably the program just in save material. But moral of the story is, they have a couple templates. So you select your template, right? How many bends you want. I'm measuring to the outermost, like I said. So I just hit OK. This is from the last hoop that I did. And then quite easily, pick your material, 1 3/4, select the die. These are calibrated dies to what I have already got here. Everybody's will be slightly different. And then just simply punch in the numbers. So 39, total height is 38.5, and the distance from the top down to the first bend is 16.5, and then finally 55. So yeah, so that's going to tell you what your main hoop is going to look like, which makes sense. I'm going to cyber attack, and then what the total cut length is right here. Then the position on the tube, which is also kind of a calibrated number, so this will be different for everybody. And then the number of degrees per bend. Not too bad.
Okay, transferred my dimensions onto the tube. I'm getting into the habit now of fully marking the entire diameter of the tube. So anyway, that's where the bends will be. So I've got my mark that I made where I want it on the die, and I preloaded. So now we're sitting right at 0. I think the first bend is 27 inches. I use an air over hydraulic system because it leaves me the ability to put it on casters. So when the tube is really long inside the shop, I can actually walk, when the tube is really long in the shop, I can walk this thing around, and it's not fixed to the floor, so it makes it a lot nicer. So anyway, I'm gonna go ahead and bend this thing up. Okay, first bend done. 27 degrees. Right on it. Gotta go to 63 on this bend. Bingo, right there. So after you have your first 2 bends, now getting the roll is super critical. So what I do is I level out the die. So I'm on the line. I go over here, I place it, and I'm on the line. So again, super critical to be sure that, you know, after you do your first 2 bends, you pay attention about how much roll you have. It only takes a half a degree or a degree, and it will skew the entire main hoop. All right. Done. So it shouldn't fit the car. It should be a little bit tight. I made it a little bit wide and a little bit tall, so I don't mind squeezing them a little bit more if I need to. Sometimes I've even creased them right in the middle, like on my wife's M, just to let it fit the roof line a little bit and squeeze, squeezes the total dimensions in. So I'm going to go back and cross-check all my dimensions now, but hopefully next time you see it, it will be in the car. Okay, so just as I expected, the roll bar is a little bit big, so by pinching in just very slightly, I'm actually able to get it to sit right inside the rockers. I'm going to end up cutting this, and when I put the plates in, I want to get more material. It's not quite touching here, so I'm about 3/8 of an inch off here. I'm about a 1/2 inch off here. I'm touching on the roof. I'm touching on this side of the roof. I'm touching on this B-pillar. I'm touching down here on this B-pillar, and I'm touching back down here on the rocker. So the only area that I need to do a little bit of work is I need to move this section towards the passenger just about a 1/2 inch, which I don't think is going to be an issue because right now the bar's being squeezed in, and I think maybe this bend here is doing a lot of the squeezing, right? It may not be uniform. So again, once I cut these, put the plates in, and move everything back out, I should be able to fill this gap in. So pretty happy with the results so far. All right, transfer your patterns onto your plate and go ahead and cut them out.
Okay, plates are roughed in. Just remember, when you put the template on, you got to cut the line out because you're drawing on the outside of the template. So I leave just typically a little bit of marker left, and then I'll shape up areas like this with the sander because the bandsaw is just too big to get into that. But anyway. Okay, plates are done. I just got to do some creases, I think, in this plate here to match the contours of the chassis. So I'll do that next, and then we should be able to tack them in. Just putting a little bend in it to contour to the chassis. Doesn't need much. Okay, after you tack the plates in position inside the car, I just bring it outside the car real quick and do a full weld on the plate seams so I can just set it right back. So here's the plate put back into the car. I just position it back like I had it. And this is what the roll bar is going to rest on. So a nice flat section, then a little bit of a taper to contour to the body. And then I'll just, you know, weld all the way around this once the roll bar is installed. On this roll bar, I do have to take these back out and let the roll bar drop to weld the top. So some cars I'll weld this out completely right now. Other cars, depending on the design and some features like that, you've got to make the decision pretty early on how you're going to weld the top of the hoop. So super critical, but this is the first one, and now I'm going to move to the passenger side. Okay, here's side number 2. So next we're going to burn out the seam sealer that's around the edges of where this is going to be welded. Okay, I just got the roll bar main hoop to the right length on the legs, so it's fitting a lot tighter up here. Still on the roof, still touching down here at the B pillar, and still touching everything. So I've got to shift my plates around just a little bit to get my gaps consistent and nice and even. But we're gonna about ready to move on to the rear stays. Quickly cut out some rear stays, so these will go in the back. We'll just put a little bend into it to match the wheel well, and should be good. These will go ahead and tack down because obviously they don't need to be removed to drop the cage for welding. So back here I want to adhere it to this plate as well as the wheel well. So I'm going to come up like this. I'm going to probably put a crease right here, and then followed by a crease back here, followed by a crease back here, and maybe another one at the very, very end where it starts to dive off. And some of these won't be exactly parallel. If you notice, I drew like it's deeper here than here, so this one may end up being a slight angle towards that rear corner, like that. So this just takes a little bit of practice, but anyway, I'm going to end up curving this and then doing a mirror image of that for the passenger side. So yeah, but back here, everything looks pretty good. Okay, first plate welded in. Now just to replicate the same thing on the other side. Okay, got the first rear stay done. Marked it to make it easy. So typically you want to go as high as possible on the main hoop. Remember, you're gonna have to weld back up here, but we're gonna drop the hoop to do that. I just cope it. Let me push that back where it's supposed to be, right there. And then down here, I want to leave myself just enough room on the back side to get the MIG gun back here to do a nice bead. I like landing this on top of the wheel well for a couple reasons. We talked about the doubling of material here. It also ties into this dude, the inner sheet steel of the quarter panel. But along with that, other good things just from a geometry perspective, this angle here is like almost like a 45-degree angle versus like your classic 30-degree, which would land you here. So this has a lot just, you know, from geometry perspective, a lot more strength. Sometimes I'll land them back here on the frame rail. But I've thought this time, honestly, it would just make more sense to go up high, giving you tons of room back here. I don't know if you ever want to stack tires or put tools or, you know, whatever you need to do that keeps the bars out of the way when you set it up like that. So anyway, that's number one, and then I'll show you guys what I did for the second one. Okay, it's a little hard to do this one-handed, but so I've got my digital protractor here. I'm basically just using experience to tell me where that's going to be and where it's going to land based upon that angle. So as you can see, it says 52.4 degrees. So when I go to the notcher, you're going to do the inverse of that. I'll show you.
So this is where it's very easy to get screwed up. So because we're looking at this in chunks of 90, the angle that we measured was 52.4, 52.5, right? So if you lay that up against the notcher, the inverse of that, right, is going to be 38 degrees. That gives you the 90. So we're going to notch at 38, not notch at 52. The notcher's got an 1 3/4 hole saw, so just pretend this is the main hoop it's going to pass through. It's got a bearing block, a shaft, and then a D-walt drill. Very, very simple.
So here's our uncleaned first pass cut. Not so bad. It's got a little gap in the bottom, which is perfect, because down here, I've got to move it from inside this hole onto the plate.
Magical here. I'm just going to cut this with a bandsaw square, and it'll probably take me 2 or 3 cuts to get it exactly the way I want it, but I find it's just easier to take a little bit at a time on something like this.
So this is after the first notch and the first cut, and I made a little mark. I'm going to take about another 1/4 inch off or so. And then this one should be good to go. I'll clean it up, and we've ready to weld it. And done. So all notched, ready to go. 2 cuts and a little bit of sanding. Nice and clean. Okay, before you give everything a tack and you start the welding, step out of the car, make sure you look at both bars together to make sure that they align and they're not one is not askew from the other, right? This part is very, very visual. You can do a lot of measuring and things and you might be able to get it, but quite frankly, I've had the best luck just by stepping out of the car, looking at it for a second before we weld it. So up next, we're gonna weld up here and here before dropping the hoop. Okay, so just welded the bottoms and around the tops of each as much as I could before dropping it. So the light's kind of crappy in here. Quick tip, if you're out of position like this, try to cut the tube into quarters and just deal with 90% of the tube at a time. Sometimes, you know, even different sides are easier if you're left-handed or right-handed. You're always going to be out of position when you're welding a roll cage, so it's something you'll just have to get used to.
All right, hoop is dropped. I'm going to weld on top of here, likewise on the other side over there, and shove it back in the car. All right, here it is, dropped and welded. So I'm going to shove it back in the car now.
Okay, so it's pushed back into place. I've welded all 4 locations completely now. Let's see, so I kind of had to use both hands and I couldn't film much of anything, but I did want to go through a couple tips, things that help. Number 1, you can see back here, I put a tack, and then when I ran the weld, it kind of made it look a little bit fragilier. So the less you tack, the better off you're going to be on the look of the welds. It doesn't really affect anything but the look, but just wanted to kind of offer that up if you don't already know. Another point is when you weld the tops and you drop it back in place, the metals are going to draw in or out, so you might have to physically push. You can take your leg and push it a lot of times just to flex it a little bit more to get it in the positions you want. If it's too close, sometimes you'll take a bar and pinch it out using the seam of the car. So again, just a couple tips to kind of get the final position right where you want it before you glue it together. So I just finished welding in the boxes. It didn't go too bad. You know, heating the metal up before burning off most of the seam sealer and cleaning it really well goes a long ways. If you run into issues as well, with the seam sealer and things like that. Just run more gas flow. A lot of times that will help it, just clean really well and not suck in a bunch of nitrogen, as long as you got a good purge going on. I'm not really a start-stop guy, so most of these welds all the way through here are just continuous. I don't like to, squirt so much. Sometimes you have to on really thin metal if your welder won't go down low enough, but for me, I try to get the welder set so I can just continuously keep on keeping on. Weld gaps and things like that also impact how well you're able to do that, but my advice is, if you set your welder up correctly, no issues. So next we're going to do the diagonal bar for the main hoop. So this is kind of a spec requirement. What I put the seat just temporarily, fitted it back in so that this tube, I can kind of figure out where to land it. So I think I'm going to land it somewhere in this vicinity because I want to be able to have this seat recess in the most rear position as much as possible and be as safe as possible, giving the driver as much clearance for their head. So I think something about right here down to there. And I'm going to check the rule book really quick. There may be a maximum distance from this point to that point, from one node to another, that I need to adhere to. But gut tells me this is going to be the right area. Along with that, I'm going to start planning the driver's side harness bar. So I believe what I'm going to do here is have a harness bar that comes out a little bit and snaps back into the diagonal that I'm going to install first. Then on the passenger side, since it'll be a fixed seat that'll be a little bit lower, I'll figure out what's best to do over there. I may be able to get away with a straight bar, but it doesn't give you a whole lot of strap adjustment. So what I'll do is just put the sliders and everything on and go in the rearmost position and see how it looks. Okay. Next is, now I'm installing the diagonal. Went ahead and notched it and cut it and everything. Again, I didn't film any of it because it's nothing I haven't already shown you. But anyway, that's the fit up top and down there. If you can see that, it should be pretty good. So tack this sucker in and then work on the plan for the harness bar. The remaining two tubes of this roll bar is the harness bars for the driver and the corresponding passenger. So the diagonal bar, I went ahead and welded that in up there, and I welded it in down here. So that's fixed. It's not going to go anywhere. I used a piece of yarn, got this super tight, and aligned it with the chassis and made sure each side was the same. And that's going to tell me where the top of the tube needs to be in the middle of the car. So all good things. So I decided to make one bar go all the way from the driver's side B-pillar to the passenger side B-pillar. So I'm just going to tuck the end of this tube at 45 degrees on each side, and then I'll cut and splice where I need for the B-pillar. So this is one of those measure twice, cut once scenarios. I know the total length between the two B-pillars of the cage, and I'm basically now just trying to center this bent bar between those B-pillars. What happens is when you cut into this further, obviously you also shrink the tube. If this was like a 90, right, you can cut this, as long as you're 90, the outside dimension's correct, you're good to go. But because this is a diagonal, it's very sensitive to any cuts you make on the inside. So you have to be very, very careful, and you need to slowly get up to this line. Not just, punch a hole and do the same thing on the other side, and you find out you're a 1/4 inch too short. There's nothing you can do about it. You can't straighten the bar back out. All right, well, the harness bar has been added, and that pretty much wraps up this roll bar. So, a couple final thoughts. If you're doing this by yourself, there's a couple ways to get the material. You could go to Roll Cage Components here in Virginia and get a kit. I don't know what his kit looks like. Obviously you watched me bend all these, as a custom piece for this car. But I know you can get a kit, and this guide might help you put your own kit in. You could use the guide too to develop your own roll bar, and you can take the things that you like out of this one or don't like out of this one and apply it. No big deal there. Number two, I think, don't don't try to do this by yourself if you can help it. You know, having a second set of hands will go a long ways. I've kind of worked by myself, so I've got a lot of tricks just to handle that aspect, but working with someone else would be a lot more efficient. But other than that, I think all in all, it turned out pretty well. We're right on the roof here, we're right on the roof here, we're touching all the way down the B-pillar, we're touching it down this side of this B-pillar. Let's see, the harness bar is recessed back 3 and a bit inches. I'm going to slide the seat in here in a minute and take a look at that. Most of the welding came out, you know, it looks pretty nice, especially for some overhead stuff. So other than that, you know, I think again, not so bad. So hopefully this guide helped you guys. If you have any questions, feel free to leave it in the comments. You know, I'll pay attention to this post for a little bit just to make sure I wrap everything up kind of cleanly. Anyway, it's 3 o'clock in the morning right now, and I need to get some sleep. So thanks for watching. So this car is leaving here in the morning, and I figured I'd do a quick recap on the final product. So if you watched all 115 or so shorts on the Rollbar build, the only thing I didn't film was I added that little brace-in between the, you can see between the harness bar and your down bar over top the driver, just to add some rigidity to the harness. A couple points though that I wanted to make sure that everybody was aware of. When you set your seats in, you can sort of see where that harness bar is, but there is a certain amount of angle that you're allowed to have on your straps for your seats. So if you take a look at the driver, you can see the harness bar is fairly straight. What you don't want to do is if the strap passes through and you tuck down to the floor, if you get in an accident, you compress your spine. So the reason this rule exists is because it's from 0, and I think it's like 15 or 20 degrees from your shoulder down, that harness bar has to make contact with the straps. So you can kind of see from a driver and passenger perspective, it's basically the same. Seats came in roughly the same height. The driver completely cut out the floor of this car. As you can see, added a little extension to the seat rail because this is now on sliders. So it kind of elevated everything back up and unfortunately mimicked the passenger a little bit. But anyway, the driver, I cut this cross beam out. I used 1-inch square tubing, remade a frame, and then bolted this as low as possible. Then of course it got stacked up by another inch or so just because of the sliders. But hopefully that means the driver won't be hitting their head on this guy, and they get an adjustable seat. On the passenger side, let's see if I just pass through. On the passenger side, this seat was bottom mount only, so I had to make a bracket that bolts into somewhat of the OE location, but sat really low, so I ended up cutting sections of the front out and things like that. It's a little difficult to see now that it's bolted in, but anyway, it's a bottom mount only seat, so this flat bar bracket bolts in the bottom seat, then the seat bracket bolts into the car. Again, nothing too crazy there. Yeah, and then the only other thing is underneath the car here, you know, we had some frame rail replacement done. So anyway, not a bad project, but I figured I'd polish it off and just, you know, recap the build a little bit and what the final product looked like. Now it's sitting on the ground, ready to go. Thanks, guys.